The pursuit of greatness demands sacrifice. This is perhaps the most uncomfortable truth about human ambition. Every path towards something extraordinary requires that we give up something familiar, safe, or immediately gratifying. Yet most of us spend our lives avoiding this fundamental reality, preferring the comfort of mediocrity to the uncertainty of transformation. This isn't merely an abstract philosophical question. It's the defining challenge that separates those who dream from those who achieve, those who wonder what if from those who discover what is. The question forces us to confront our deepest fears, examine our true priorities, and acknowledge the gap between who we are and who we could become. What makes this inquiry so unsettling is that it strips away our comfortable illusions about having it all. Greatness and comfort rarely coexist. The real question isn't whether sacrifice is required, it's whether we're honest enough to admit what we're actually afraid to lose and courageous enough to choose growth over security. The mental gymnastics of self-deception. Most of us live our lives wearing carefully constructed masks driven by an unconscious need to resolve the tension between who we are and who we think we should be. We present versions of ourselves designed to gain approval, avoid conflict, and maintain the illusion of having everything figured out. These personas become so convincing that we often fool ourselves into believing they represent our true identity. Our minds are masterful at rationalization, creating elaborate justifications for why we can't pursue our deepest aspirations. We tell ourselves we're being responsible when we're actually being fearful. We claim we're considering others when we're protecting ourselves from vulnerability. This self-protective mechanism becomes a prison when it prevents authentic growth. Think about your own life for a moment. How much of your daily behavior is driven by who you actually are versus who you think you should be? The career path chosen to impress others rather than fulfill yourself? The opinions you express to fit in rather than speak your truth? The relationships you maintain out of obligation rather than genuine connection? The pursuit of authentic greatness demands that we sacrifice these comfortable facades. This means giving up the easy approval that comes from being predictable and agreeable. It means risking disappointment, judgment, and even rejection from people whose opinions we've learned to value more than our own inner compass. This psychological sacrifice cuts deeper than most people expect. It's not just about changing behaviors or making different choices. It's about confronting the uncomfortable reality that many of our most cherished self-concepts might be elaborate defense mechanisms designed to protect us from the risk of being truly seen and potentially rejected. The shadow aspects of our personality, the parts we've disowned, ignored, or actively suppressed, often contain the very qualities necessary for our particular form of greatness. The overly serious professional might need to reclaim their playfulness. The people pleaser might need to develop their capacity for healthy conflict. The fiercely independent person might need to learn how to truly depend on others. Creating your own values in a world of inherited programming. We live in a world saturated with other people's definitions of success, meaning, and worthiness. From childhood, our minds absorb and encode messages about what matters, what's valuable, and what constitutes a life well lived. Most of these messages come not from our own experience and reflection, but from family systems, cultural conditioning, media influences, and social pressures that may have little connection to our individual nature and circumstances. Our early experiences literally shape how we think and respond to the world. The mental frameworks formed in childhood become the default patterns through which we interpret everything. What we call values are often just deeply ingrained thought habits, automatic responses that feel natural because they have been reinforced thousands of times. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche recognized that true greatness requires what he called self-overcoming. the courage to question inherited values and create our own moral framework based on our authentic experience and deepest convictions. This means literally rewiring our mental patterns, creating new ways of thinking while allowing old ones to weaken through disuse. This process demands enormous sacrifice because it requires giving up the security of following predetermined paths and the comfort of having our choices validated by established authorities. When you decide to create your own definition of success, you lose the easy benchmarks that tell you whether you're winning or losing according to conventional standards. Your mind, which craves certainty and predictability, rebels against this ambiguity. This value creation process extends beyond individual choices to challenge our relationship with uncertainty itself. The human mind is a prediction machine, constantly trying to anticipate what will happen next based on past patterns. When you're following established paths, your mind has some idea of where they lead. When you're creating your own path, you must sacrifice the comfort of knowing exactly where you're headed in favour of trusting your ability to navigate whatever emerges. The entrepreneur who chooses to build a business around their authentic passions rather than market-tested formulas embodies this principle. They sacrifice the predictability of proven business models for the uncertainty and potential of creating something genuinely new. Their reward systems, which normally favour familiar low-risk activities, must be retrained to find satisfaction in exploration and experimentation rather than just achievement and security. The ancient wiring of belonging and the cost of authenticity. One of the most challenging aspects of pursuing greatness is the inevitable tension it creates between individual development and social belonging. We are evolutionarily wired for tribal survival. Being rejected by the group literally meant death for our ancestors. The more authentic you become, the more you may find yourself at odds with people who knew you in your previous iterations, who benefited from your old patterns, or who feel threatened by your growth. This social dimension of sacrifice often catches people off guard because it triggers ancient survival mechanisms that operate below conscious awareness. Your mind doesn't distinguish between social rejection and physical threat. Both activate the same stress response systems that kept our ancestors alive. They expect that pursuing their authentic path will feel liberating and joyful, and it often does, but they're unprepared for the loneliness that can accompany genuine self-development. Think about your own social circle. How many of your relationships are based on who you used to be rather than who you're becoming? How many of your social connections depend on maintaining certain patterns of behaviour, belief, or lifestyle that might be inconsistent with your deepest aspirations? Your mind forms mental patterns not just around individual habits, but around relational dynamics, the roles you play, the patterns you maintain, the expectations others have of you. The person who decides to pursue sobriety sacrifices not just alcohol, but often entire social networks built around drinking culture. Their mind must cope with the loss of familiar social cues, shared activities, and group identity markers that provided a sense of belonging. The individual who chooses to live more simply sacrifices not just material possessions, but potentially relationships with people whose connection was based on shared consumption patterns. This social sacrifice extends beyond specific relationships to challenge our fundamental need for belonging and approval. The part of our mind that processes social pain becomes active when we experience rejection or disapproval. The person pursuing authentic greatness must develop the emotional resilience to tolerate these alarm signals without automatically conforming to relieve the discomfort. The civil rights leader who challenges unjust systems, the whistleblower who exposes organizational corruption, the artist who creates work that challenges popular assumptions. All of these individuals must sacrifice social comfort for the possibility of contributing something valuable to the world. They must develop what we might call moral courage, the ability to override their mind's social conformity mechanisms and act according to their deepest convictions, even when doing so results in social isolation or professional consequences. Losing yourself to find yourself. Here's where the mechanics of mental change become truly fascinating. Often, what we think we're giving up returns to us in unexpected and more fulfilling forms. The sacrifices required for greatness aren't just about loss, they're about transformation, about changing the patterns through which we experience and respond to life, rather than simply reducing our options. Research shows that our minds remain capable of dramatic reorganization throughout our lives. The mental patterns that support old ways of being can weaken while new ones strengthen, literally changing who we are at the most fundamental level. This means that the discomfort we feel when making changes isn't just emotional. It's the natural resistance that occurs when we disrupt established patterns. The parent who sacrifices some immediate time with their children to pursue personal growth and development might initially feel guilty because their caregiving instincts interpret time away as potential neglect. But as they become more authentic, more fulfilled, and more aligned with their own values, they often discover that they become better parents, more present when they're with their children, more inspiring as role models, and more capable of supporting their children's own journey toward authenticity. The professional who leaves a high-paying but soul-crushing job to pursue work that feels meaningful might sacrifice financial security and social status. Their stress responses initially spike as their mind interprets reduced income as a survival threat. But they often discover forms of satisfaction that money can't buy: deeper relationships, better health, increased creativity, and the profound reward that comes from aligning daily actions with core values. This paradox suggests that many of our attachments to what we think we can't sacrifice are based on outdated mental programming rather than current reality. We think we need the approval of others, but what we actually need is self-respect. We think we need financial security, but what we actually need is the confidence that we can navigate uncertainty and create value in the world. We think we need to maintain certain relationships, but what we actually need is genuine connection and understanding. The transformation process often reveals that our fears about sacrifice are more imaginary than real. The person who fears that pursuing their authentic interest will lead to social isolation might discover that authenticity actually attracts deeper, more meaningful relationships. The individual who worries that following their passion will lead to financial ruin might find that passion-driven work often generates more sustainable success than obligation-driven work. But this paradox only works when the sacrifices are made from a place of genuine conviction, rather than reactive rebellion. The difference between authentic sacrifice for greatness and self-destructive behavior lies in the underlying motivation. Are you giving something up because your conscious mind is moving you towards something valuable, or because your emotional reactions are running away from something uncomfortable? Rewiring attention in a connected world. Our contemporary world presents unique challenges for anyone willing to sacrifice for greatness. We live in an environment designed to maximize convenience, minimize discomfort, and provide constant entertainment and stimulation. These conditions trigger our reward systems in ways that make sustained effort and delayed gratification increasingly difficult. Technology has created unprecedented opportunities for individual expression, creativity, and impact. But this same technology has also hijacked our attention systems, creating new forms of addiction, distraction, and shallow engagement that can prevent us from doing the deep work that greatness requires. every notification triggers a small reward, training our minds to crave constant stimulation rather than sustained focus. Consider your own relationship with digital technology. How much of your day is spent in reactive mode, responding to notifications, consuming content created by others, engaging in activities that feel productive but don't actually move you toward your most important goals? Your mind's default patterns have likely been conditioned to seek external stimulation rather than internal reflection. The sacrifice required for greatness in our time might involve retraining these hijacked attention systems. This means giving up the addictive comfort of constant stimulation for the more challenging but rewarding experience of sustained focus and deep engagement. Your capacity for attention control literally strengthens when you practice resisting distractions and maintaining focus on chosen activities. This digital sacrifice extends to our relationship with external validation itself. Social media platforms are designed to provide intermittent reinforcement through likes, comments, shares, and other metrics that can become addictive substitutes for genuine accomplishment and authentic connection. The variable ratio reinforcement schedule, never knowing when the next reward will come, is the same pattern that makes gambling addictive. The person pursuing greatness might need to sacrifice these digital validation loops for the more uncertain, but ultimately more satisfying experience of creating work that serves their deepest values regardless of immediate recognition. This requires developing internal validation systems, mental patterns that generate satisfaction from the process of creation and growth rather than just external approval. The challenge extends beyond individual behavior to our relationship with information and expertise. The internet provides access to more information than any human in history has ever had, but it also creates the illusion that having access to information is the same as having knowledge, wisdom, or skill. Our minds can mistake consuming information for learning, scrolling for studying, and exposure for expertise. The courage to begin. From potential to psychological reality. Perhaps the most fundamental sacrifice required for greatness is the willingness to move from the realm of possibility into the arena of actual effort and mental change. As long as we don't fully commit to pursuing our highest aspirations, we can maintain the comfortable illusion that we're capable of anything. The moment we begin seriously pursuing greatness in one direction, we must acknowledge the limitations of our time, energy, and current mental architecture. This sacrifice of unlimited potential for specific actuality touches something deep in human mental functioning. Our minds are prediction machines that prefer familiar patterns over uncertain outcomes. The aspiring novelist who has never written a complete story can maintain the fantasy that they could write the next great American novel because their mind has never been confronted with the reality of their current skill level. The moment they sit down and begin writing seriously, their mind must process feedback that might challenge their self-concept. Think about your own unrealized aspirations. What dreams have you kept safely in the realm of someday, rather than moving them into the messier world of daily practice and incremental mental development? What talents have you preserved in potential, rather than developing through the awkward, frustrating, but ultimately rewarding process of building new mental pathways through deliberate practice? The sacrifice of beginning involves giving up several comfortable illusions that your mind maintains to protect your ego. The illusion that you can be great without being bad first, the illusion that inspiration will eventually make effort unnecessary, and the illusion that the right conditions will eventually eliminate the need for courage. Beginning means accepting that your mind will resist unfamiliar challenges, that you will experience the discomfort of incompetence before developing competence, and that clarity emerges through action rather than contemplation. Research on skill acquisition shows that our minds literally restructure themselves through practice. Mental pathways become more efficient with repetition. But this process requires tolerating the initial inefficiency and discomfort of unpracticed mental patterns. Your mind will generate feelings of frustration, inadequacy, and desire to quit. These aren't character flaws, they're predictable responses to mental adaptation. This sacrifice of potential for actuality also involves accepting responsibility for our choices and their psychological consequences. When we keep our aspirations in the realm of possibility, we can avoid the stress response that comes with real accountability. When we begin actually pursuing greatness, our minds must adapt to both successes and failures, both progress and setbacks. Redefining failure as learning opportunity. The pursuit of greatness requires a fundamentally different relationship with failure than most people are comfortable with. Our minds are evolutionarily wired to interpret failure as danger. Alarm systems activate, stress hormones flood our system, and our fight or flight responses engage. But greatness is impossible without failure, because it's impossible without genuine risk, experimentation, and pushing beyond current mental capabilities. This sacrifice here involves giving up our mind's natural tendency to avoid situations that might activate our threat detection systems. This psychological sacrifice can be more difficult than material sacrifices because it requires overriding millions of years of evolutionary programming designed to keep us safe from harm. Think about your own relationship with failure. How much of your current life is organized around avoiding situations where you might fail publicly? How many opportunities have you declined, risks have you avoided, and dreams have you deferred because they carried the possibility of triggering your mind's alarm systems? Modern research reveals that failure, when properly processed, creates the optimal conditions for mental growth. The emotional intensity of making mistakes actually helps consolidate learning by increasing the release of chemicals that strengthen memory formation. The entrepreneur who launches a business that fails experiences more psychological growth, more actual mental change, than someone who never tries. This reframing of failure as learning opportunity requires sacrificing our attachment to appearing competent in favor of actually becoming competent. It means giving up the safety of staying within our proven abilities for the growth that comes from stretching beyond our current mental limitations. Your executive function and learning capacity become more active when you're operating at the edge of your abilities. The sacrifice extends to our relationship with uncertainty itself. Greatness requires operating in ambiguous situations where the right course of action isn't clear, where multiple approaches might work, and where the outcome is genuinely unknown. This means sacrificing the psychological comfort of certainty for the adaptive advantage of mental flexibility. Training your mind for delayed gratification. Modern culture emphasizes immediate gratification, quick results, and instant feedback, patterns that train our minds to expect immediate rewards for minimal effort. But greatness typically emerges over longer time horizons through sustained effort, delayed gratification, and the compounding effects of consistent practice. This temporal dimension of sacrifice, retraining our reward systems to value long-term growth over immediate pleasure, may be one of the most challenging aspects of pursuing greatness in our current environment. This sacrifice involves not just specific pleasures or conveniences, but literally rewiring your mind's reward circuitry. Instead of optimizing for immediate satisfaction, you begin training your mental patterns to find satisfaction in progress, effort, and delayed outcomes. This requires overriding your mind's default preference for immediate rewards in favor of building mental frameworks that support sustained effort. The famous Stanford marshmallow experiment showed that children who could delay gratification, resisting one marshmallow to get two later, had better life outcomes decades later. Brain imaging studies reveal that people good at delaying gratification have stronger connections between their planning centres and emotional centres. This long-term perspective requires sacrificing not just immediate pleasures but immediate validation. The person building expertise in any field must endure long periods where their efforts don't produce visible results, where their progress feels invisible to others, and where the gap between their current abilities and their aspirations seems impossibly large. Their minds must learn to find satisfaction in the process rather than just outcomes. This temporal sacrifice also involves giving up the psychological comfort of comparing your behind-the-scenes struggles with other people's public successes. Social comparison activates specific mental regions related to status and self-evaluation. Social media and popular culture tend to highlight the dramatic moments of achievement, while ignoring the years of invisible preparation that made those moments possible. The person committed to their own long-term development must train their mind to resist these comparison triggers and focus on their own developmental trajectory. Personal change as social influence. As we examine what we're willing to sacrifice for greatness, it's crucial to understand that individual mental changes inevitably affect the broader social network. Our minds are equipped with mirror mechanisms that automatically mimic and respond to the behaviours and emotions of others. The sacrifices we make for our own growth become investments in collective human potential through psychological contagion. Our changes literally influence the mental states of people around us. When you choose authenticity over conformity, you broadcast this authenticity to others, giving their minds permission to activate similar patterns. When you pursue your genuine interests rather than socially approved activities, you model the possibility of authentic living for everyone in your sphere of influence. When you develop new skills, create original work, or solve interesting problems, you expand the range of what seems possible to the people around you. Understanding these broader impacts can help reframe personal sacrifice as a form of social contribution rather than self-indulgence. The psychological discomfort you experience while growing beyond your current limitations becomes a contribution to the ongoing human project of expanding what's possible, both individually and collectively. Your personal mental growth contributes to collective human evolution. Developing self-awareness. The question, what are you willing to sacrifice for greatness, ultimately requires us to develop what we might call meta-awareness, the ability to observe our own mental processes without being completely controlled by them. This involves learning to notice when our minds are operating from fear, habit, or social conditioning versus when we're acting from genuine choice and authentic aspiration. Rather than trying to eliminate the fundamental tensions between competing mental systems, maturity involves learning to hold them consciously. This means developing the flexibility to navigate competing demands without needing to find perfect solutions that satisfy all mental systems simultaneously. Your conscious mind learns to mediate between different impulses rather than being hijacked by whichever system is most activated in the moment. This integrative approach requires sacrificing black and white thinking for the more complex but realistic understanding that most important life decisions involve mental trade-offs rather than clear-cut choices between good and bad options. It means giving up the fantasy that you can activate all reward systems simultaneously without any psychological costs, while also rejecting the limiting belief that pursuing greatness requires extreme mental deprivation. Small mental changes, large transformations. Perhaps the most practical insight about sacrifice for greatness is that mental change typically happens through accumulated daily choices rather than dramatic gestures. The transformation occurs not through single moments of heroic mental rewiring, but through consistent decisions to strengthen some mental patterns while allowing others to weaken through disuse. Every choice you make either reinforces existing mental patterns or begins building new ones. The writer becomes great through daily writing, which literally strengthens the mental pathways involved in language processing and creative expression. The leader develops through daily choices to act with integrity and courage, strengthening mental patterns related to moral reasoning and emotional regulation. The artist grows through daily engagement with their craft, building increasingly sophisticated pattern recognition and creative problem-solving capabilities. This daily dimension of sacrifice makes the pursuit of greatness both more accessible and more challenging than we might expect. More accessible because it doesn't require dramatic life changes or exceptional circumstances, just the willingness to make different mental choices in ordinary moments. More challenging because it requires sustained commitment over long periods without guaranteed outcomes or constant external validation. Your mind changes most effectively through consistent, moderate challenges rather than sporadic, intense efforts. Think about your own daily routines and choices. What small sacrifices could you make consistently that would compound over time into significant mental development? What immediate gratifications could you give up for investments in your long-term mental architecture? These daily sacrifices often feel insignificant in the moment, but their cumulative mental effects over months and years can be transformative. They represent a fundamentally different approach to mental development, one based on deliberate choices rather than automatic habits, long-term thinking rather than immediate reaction, and proactive development rather than passive consumption. The choice that rewires. You sacrifice for greatness doesn't have a universal answer because greatness itself is deeply personal and every mind is unique. Your sacrifices will be uniquely yours, shaped by your circumstances, talents, and authentic aspirations. But this inquiry demands to be lived, not merely contemplated, because living it literally changes your mind. Engaging seriously with this inquiry produces profound mental effects. It strips away the comfortable cognitive biases you maintain about your priorities. It exposes the chasm between your stated values and your actual mental patterns. It forces you to confront whether you're living your own life or performing someone else's programmed responses. Most importantly, it reveals that every moment of settling for less is a mental choice, one you can unmake at any time through deliberate practice. The brutal truth is that comfort and greatness activate different mental systems and are fundamentally incompatible. Every person who has created something meaningful has rewired their mind through sacrifice, not because suffering is virtuous, but because focus demands mental specialization, and specialization requires strengthening some pathways while allowing others to weaken. But here's the reframe that changes everything at the psychological level. Sacrifice for greatness is about mental love, not mental loss. You don't sacrifice comfort. You choose meaningful work over empty ease, activating patterns related to purpose rather than just pleasure. You don't sacrifice social approval. You choose authentic expression over performing for others, strengthening internal validation systems rather than external ones. You don't sacrifice immediate pleasure. You choose long-term fulfillment over momentary gratification, training your reward systems to respond to growth rather than just consumption. This is the path of mental self-definition, not self-denial. Your willingness to sacrifice reveals your deepest commitments and literally shapes your mental structure. Your choices show what you truly value, not what you claim to value. Your actions demonstrate your authentic priorities, stripped of social posturing and self-deception, while building the mental architecture to support those priorities. The real question isn't what you're willing to sacrifice. It's what you love enough to build your mental patterns around. What matters so deeply that you'd choose it even when it requires rewiring your mind's default patterns. What kind of person do you want to become, and what mental changes are you prepared to make today to support that transformation? This moment, right now, reading these words, is when the question stops being theoretical and becomes psychological. Your greatness isn't waiting for perfect conditions, complete preparation, or external permission. It's waiting for you to stop rehearsing your life and start literally rewiring your mind through action. The sacrifices you make for greatness become investments in human possibility. When you choose authenticity over comfort, you give others permission to do the same. When you pursue your authentic path, you expand what seems mentally possible for everyone around you. Your individual mental change contributes to collective human evolution, not through grand gestures, but through the daily choice to grow beyond your current mental limitations. The question confronts you not in some distant future moment of clarity, but in your next decision. In the conversation you're avoiding, the project you're postponing, the truth you're not telling, the risk you're not taking. Your greatness lives in the gap between your current mental patterns and the ones you could develop, and that gap closes only through action. What are you willing to sacrifice for greatness? The answer isn't in your thoughts, your intentions, or your someday plans. It's in what you do next. It's in whether you choose comfort or courage, conformity or authenticity, familiar mental patterns or the ones that call to something deeper within your mind's potential. Your life is not a dress rehearsal and your mind is not fixed. This is the only chance you get to discover what your mental architecture is truly capable of. The question waits for your answer, not in words, but in the life you choose to live and the mind you choose to build.